Hey, Jay.
Hi, Rita. Tom Farr, thanks for looking out for my daughter over there at the shop.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed her having there. Got to give her a hard time.
She feels like she has a friend in the car business now.
All right.
Hi, Matt Fritz, Eric Berlin. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. You've given us a quorum, so that's a good thing. So thank you.
Hi, Matt. I'm Rita.
Hi, Kyle. Eric Berlin here. Thanks for being here.
No, she's like, she's thinking about it. Like,
Hi, Kyle. I'm Rita.
Hi, Rita.
Kyle, are you in town? I see your Instagram photos seem to be all over the world.
Yeah, I'm in town right now. I'm actually looking out the road from the house here in Northgate.
Got it.
Well, good evening, everybody. This is Eric Berlin. I'm the city administrator in North Kansas City. It is 6 o'clock p.m. So I'll go ahead and take liberty of calling the meeting to order. I'll go ahead and ask the city clerk to please call the roll to confirm that there is a quorum tonight.
Commissioner Farr,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Miles,
Here.
Commissioner Pierce,
Yes.
Commissioner Fritz,
Here.
Commissioner Swearingen,
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Hoover. I can see. Commissioner Nolte is
Here.
not, okay. And Commissioner Harrell.
Here.
Jerry Nolte, welcome. If you wouldn't mind putting yourself on video so that we can see you.
Actually, I don't have a camera built into this particular computer, and it's by popular demand as well.
All right. If you want to be recognized, then just please speak up and we'll handle it that way.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for being here. Okay. So with that, I will go ahead and turn matters over to the Vice Chairperson, Tom Farr. The previous chairperson, Denise Lambert, did resign earlier. So that does leave the meeting to Commissioner Farr. So Tom.
Well, good evening, everybody. It looks like we're going to call a meeting to order for the Tax and Finance Commission, September the 10th, 2020 at 6 p.m. The first one is election of officers this evening. As everybody knows, we need to elect a chairman, a vice chair, a secretary, and a treasurer. And the first one out of the chute would be, do I hear any nominations for chairperson?
I nominate Tom Farr for chairperson, if that's legal as a sitting councilman.
Yes. Any
So moved.
other nominee?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All those opposed? Hearing none, it looks like I'm it. For the vice chair then,
I nominate Rita Pierce for vice chair.
Second.
any other nominations? All those in favor? Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Looks like that one holds. Secretary, which was formerly Kyle Myers. Do I hear any nominations?
I nominate Kyle Miles to fulfill that position again this year.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other nominations? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Kyle, looks like you're it again. And a treasurer who is formerly Carl Morse, who has resigned. Do I hear any nominations?
I nominate Matt Fritz as the
Second.
treasurer.
I second that.
I hear a second back in there. Any more nominations? All those in favor?
Aye.
I
Any opposed? Hearing none, it looks like he's it again. On to number 2, approval of the minutes of December 11th of 2019.
Excuse me, Commissioner Farr,
Yes, ma'am.
do we need to vote? And Eric, maybe I should ask you, do we have to appoint the records custodian of the commission?
Well, I'm not seeing that on the agenda.
It's after the assistant treasurer, then it says further resolved that blank is hereby appointed as records custodian of the commission.
Can you remind me who the current records custodian is?
Me.
Would somebody like to make a motion to appoint the city clerk Crystal Doss as records custodian?
I so move.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Crystal, looks like you're it. On to item number 2 now, approval of the minutes of December 11th of 2019. Do I have a motion?
I'll make this Jerry Nolte. I'll make the motion.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Thank you very much. Item number 3, resolution number 2020-2, consideration of the resolution of the Tax Increment Financing Commission of North Kansas City, Missouri, recommending approval of the amended and restated declaration of covenants, conditions, restrictions, easements affecting property within Northgate Village Retail Center. Eric, I think that one's to you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I will begin the topic. So development in the commercial area of Northgate Village does have certain development restrictions, which are the covenants, codes, restrictions, and easements. We commonly call them CCRs for the Northgate Village Retail Center. The original CCRs were adopted in 2003 and amended a couple of times since then. We are anticipating issuing an RFP for the development of that property here very shortly. This is the commercial area there in the general vicinity of the former Ruby Tuesdays that's undeveloped between 29th Avenue and 32nd Avenue. And before we issued that RFP, we did want to propose some amendments to the CCRs to make it more easily developable. Of course, we've been trying for 20 years to develop that property, and we have had limited success. So we have been working with the TIF Commission's legal counsel, Steve Sparks, with Brian K. Leighton Paisner, to update those. And we have a number of attachments in your packet. I don't think it's nearly quite as complex as it looks like from the materials in your packet. But at this point, I'd like to ask Steve Sparks to summarize the changes that are being proposed to the CCRs. Steve?
Thank you, Eric, and members of the commission. Steve Sparks, Brian Cave, Leighton Paisner. You should have had in your packet a summary that we prepared of the highlights of the amendments that are suggested through doing an amended and restated set of CC&Rs. And I really don't want to take your time and go through all of those or all 23 pages of the documents, certainly. But the idea here is to clean up the CC&Rs so that they match up to the current city code and to the design guidelines that remain in the TIF plan. So what we're trying to do is streamline the ability for the city to sell the 2 lots that it owns and get a quality developer for those lots without all the entanglements of CC&Rs that don't tie to existing city code. I think that's the simplest way to summarize the whole thing. The TIF Commission remains the party or one of the parties in addition to the city that approves design guidelines, which has historically been part of the Northgate TIF plan. I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can go through these in detail, but I'm sure you really don't want to go page by page through the 23 pages.
Commissioner Swearingen, looked like you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know just a whole lot about that piece of property, but what I know, tell me if I'm right. For a while, we said that it had to be retail and that it couldn't duplicate any other business that was already in Clay County, if I remember correctly. Are these CCRs changing that to where now it can be multifamily or some other use, or is that something totally different?
It's still dedicated to retail inside the Northgate TIF plan, but what we tried to do was make it a much easier for a single developer perhaps to buy the Ruby Tuesday lot and the other 2 lots and work through city code and putting them together into an appropriate use.
And
so really
inside the CCR?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Pierce?
It seems to me that it'd probably be better retail. I mean, when I was on the council, we talked about this a lot, and it's such a small kind of area compared to other areas. So I think retail would be great. And I think if we clean it up, and I actually did read through all these things, which was really hard for me since I'm new. And I think that making it easier for retail establishments to come in there, particularly given that location with all the population around there, would be a great thing.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Swearingen?
Is there still so is that the only use is retail? And then secondly, is that requirement in there that it can't duplicate another Clay County business? Or it can't, I think maybe it can't steal from, you can't just relocate there from Clay County.
Yeah, that's a TIF law requirement, Commissioner. That applies to the TIF plan itself. I don't in the CC&Rs, that cannibalization concept.
So then what have we really made easier then? Just
well, you know, well, number one, we've tied it to city code. This was, you know, the set of CC&Rs, which is before my time, were developed in 2003, and they tried to deal with things that are now covered by the code. So instead of burdening the property with those, you go to city code, and if city code changes or modifies, it's already built in. And we tried to eliminate some of the restrictions about common areas and driveways and so forth that may make it difficult for somebody to put 2 or 3 of the lots together.
If I may jump in, this is Kim Nakahoto. One of the things we also did, the previous restrictions made it so that it could only be a 1-story building. This removes that restriction, meaning that if a developer wanted to come in and perhaps put mixed use or retail on the bottom and living or office several stories higher, the changes to the CC&R would allow those style of developments.
is that reasonable? Is there enough parking for such things?
And I hate to step on Sarah's toes, the parking requirements would still go through the city review. So whatever that developer would come up with would still need to meet the city's parking requirements.
Okay.
This is Jerry Nolte. I had a question.
Yes, sir.
First off, it sounds like an awful lot of what's going on here are largely technical and updates to the TIF plan, which obviously are needed. On the issue of being able to offer a larger tract of land and consolidate those lots, is that something that there's been interest in? And I don't need to know necessarily need to know any specifics, but is that something that there has been some interest expressed in by some parties, or is it mainly just to the idea that it would, generally speaking, make it a more marketable piece of property that could broaden the appeal as far as development goes?
So yes, about within the last year or so, the city actually did purchase a piece of repurchase a piece of property that it had sold. That was it was bought by Russell Stover some years back, and then Russell Stover did not develop it. They then sold it to another party. And so in order to try to make it more marketable, we actually did purchase property just north of Ruby Tuesdays to try to create a bigger parcel. So that is something that we have attempted to do in before we issue an RFP to try to get some renewed interest in development in that particular area.
Thank you. That does answer my question.
Any other questions or discussion on the CCRs?
This is Steve Hoover. I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
The problem with that property is the access. There's only access northbound. Very little. Got that one turn lane southbound, and you're limited with that. Has any thought been given into turning it over to these and building more apartments for the elderly down here, that spot?
So, yes, sir. Thank you. So I will speak to that. So there has been some discussion about, what the CCRs would allow, but I'll go ahead and jump maybe a little bit out of order from your agenda, but under item 4, Northgate Village discussion, there is the item RFP for city-owned commercial property, it says. And in fact, we, hopefully after the commission does adopt the new CCRs that we hope will streamline things and make it a little bit easier, we do intend to issue an RFP. And we have talked to the city council, and the city council has indicated that they would be all right with trying to broaden the possible uses of that property, because we have tried to develop it commercially. Hunt Midwest for a long time, according to the previous development agreement, was the party that was trying to market that property and develop it commercially. And we just simply have not had success, largely for the reason that Commissioner Hoover, you mentioned. We think access is a big problem. And so it is possible at this point, it would be our intention to issue an RFP, and we would not limit it necessarily just to commercial or retail. I mean, I think we'd love to have that. And if a good developer came along that had a good proposal, I think the city would very carefully consider it. But at this point, I think we understand that we may have to consider other uses such as senior housing or other kind of housing there, if nothing else is proposed for the area, in part due to the access issues that you mentioned. So that is our intention in the RFP that we are intending to issue, is to open it up to other uses, not just commercial or retail.
Thank you.
I think, sorry, just to interject, I think that's a wise move, because I've considered for a long time whether it's an extension of the gardens or something else. I think that property could be well served as multifamily.
It's certainly been very successful in that area so far. Any other questions on just on the CCRs? Would anybody like to make a motion on the resolution 2020-2?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. On to item number 4, Northgate Village discussion. Eric, is that yours too?
I'll introduce it, but I'm going to turn matters over in a moment. So the next item under Northgate Village discussion, City Council Development Agreement for the city-owned property at 23rd Avenue and Swift Street. This is an informational item, but the city's been working closely with both our legal counsel and our financial advisor, Matthew Webster from Stifel Nicholas. And at this point, I'd like to turn matters over to Matt to summarize where we are at for the multifamily development at 23rd and Swift. Matt.
Good evening, everybody. Again, Matt Webster with Stifel. So I have a presentation here that was actually prepared for the city council that we used back in July, and I'll just go through it briefly and then answer any of your questions. So this was a parcel of property that Rainin Companies was responsible for developing. And ultimately, he agreed that he wasn't going to develop it, and the development rights were terminated. At that point, we went out with an RFP. We had substantial interest. I think we had more than 10 responses. It's 6 acres. It's zoned for multifamily. And the TIF plan said a minimum of 222 residential units. And so that's what we put into the RFP. Ultimately, we were able to get a few more units. So it's a big parcel, very valuable parcel, and a great development site. Next slide, please. So development proposals came in at the end of last year. They were reviewed by the city staff. We did interviews. We talked to the council back in February. It took a lot longer than we expected to get this done because of COVID related delays, but ultimately Star Development, the developer is Tim Harris out of the city of Liberty. Tim has a lot of experience with North Kansas City, and his design was universally favored by the city's review committee. From there, we went to the preparation of a term sheet and then ultimately the negotiation of a development agreement, which has since been executed. The documents involved were a land purchase and sale agreement, a development agreement, and then they were presented to the council for approval. So the transaction is in place, and we are waiting for the developer to go through the entitlement process and sort of move things forward. Next slide, please. Here is just a view looking sort of to the northwest from the corner of 23rd and Swift, just an idea of the massing and some of the design elements. There at the top of the page on the north side of the property is kind of a parking deck, and then it's 4 stories of apartments. So very different than the current apartments that surround it. But we all thought a good design. Next slide, please. So Star's final proposal, under the development agreement, they are required to do not less than 300 apartments. We wanted to increase the massing on the site to the extent reasonably possible, and the judgment of the city staff was that 300 apartments was very feasible. Structured and surface parking. Initially, there was some talk about retail or commercial space, but in the current environment, that's simply not feasible, and the city agreed that it didn't make any sense to build space for which there probably wouldn't be any tenants. The land purchase price, which was an important part of this transaction, was $3 million. That was equal to or greater than all proposals. Works out to $11.50 a square foot, which I think is a market rate payment. The next important element was a pilot payment. So in addition to the tax increments that are currently in place and are obviously generating no income because it's currently city-owned property, the developer agreed to make a pilot payment of $300,000 a year for 15 years. After 15 years, it will go on the tax rolls at full value. And again, that's in consideration of the development. And then they also agreed to a prompt construction schedule. We're obviously anxious to get the project, up and running. It's been many years of delays. So they're required to commence construction promptly. And we expect that it would be complete within 30 months.
Might I interject here really quickly?
Certainly.
Are there any kind of requirements in place that if they don't meet any of these construction schedule criteria, they start getting assessed a fee or anything like that? The reason I ask is I know there have been I understand some of the delays with the 18th and Swift development were beyond everyone's control, but I'm just trying to say, how are we holding basically these developers' feet to the fire and hitting these goals?
I don't believe that there are any punitive fines, but I'll ask Steve Sparks. Am I misremembering? I don't think we had any kind of damage provisions for payments, did we? Steve?
Sorry, I was on mute. Give me just a second. I'll look at the development agreement because I always want to look at things before I quote myself. I don't think we have a fine opportunity. We have the ability to buy the property back. And
So Commissioner, what we were most keyed on was getting somebody going. But if they don't get going, having the ability to get this property back quickly and then find a developer. So I guess my philosophy, and I do a lot of this work, my philosophy is if somebody is delayed in getting this done, there is no city money. Now there are obviously incentives tied up in this, but the city isn't writing anybody a check. And so he's gone out and borrowed a whole lot of money. I think the projected budget on this is around 40 to 50 million. So a very large construction loan plus whatever equity. And so that construction lender has all kinds of incentives to get this done. And generally what they do is if a developer fails, they have the right to kick the guy out and bring somebody in and finish it. Sure. And I think that kind of market-based approach is appropriate for this. And it's likely to lead to a good result. If there's something unanticipated and somebody's, financing is crushed and they are reduced to bankruptcy, then frankly, putting a fine against them doesn't get you anywhere and you never collect the fine anyway. So
sure, yeah. And my questions were more around on the requirements piece. Don't want to get in another situation like we had with Rainin where they basically sat on a highly desirable plot of land for years and years. So it's good to see this.
Exactly so. So that was exactly the approach that we took. We can't have a replay of that. If they don't move forward with urgency and do what they say they were going to do, then we can part ways and we'll just take it right back. And I know there are other developers waiting in the wings. Next slide, please.
Hey, could I ask a question though, right before we move off this particular slide? This is Paul Harrell. Could you guys hear me?
Yes, sir. Please,
okay,
please do.
Question. The $300,000 is the annual payment to the city. Is that payment going directly to the city? I guess my real question would be is, considering there is a residential component to that, is there any pilot payments that could also be made payable to the North Kansas City School District?
Not during the remaining term of the TIF. Once the TIF terminates, which is not that many years, I want to say 2031, then the pilot payment will be divided among all the taxing jurisdictions. But we did actually have a discussion with them about the possibility of students. And although we didn't have anything in writing, their statement to us was that they thought there would be very few, families or adults with children, just simply because of the layout, the cost of the project, and the size of the units. So there's no carve out for additional funding to the schools by virtue of this agreement.
But we're back fully on the tax rolls, I think, in 2032.
Correct.
I remember, Matt. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There'll be 6 or 7 years where the $300,000 pilot is distributed amongst all the taxing jurisdictions.
You mean after 2032?
Yeah, after the TIF plan burns off.
The TIF ends in 2032, and then there's 5 additional years of pilot payments, and then in the 6th year, the project would be fully valued for assessment purposes and come fully onto the tax rolls.
What year is it that it comes fully onto the tax rolls?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Fritz?
What year is it that it comes fully onto the tax rolls?
2038.
Okay, and well, I will just say that we always get a little bit jittery when we do talk about basically residential type units within our school district, because there is the possibility that will house students. So just a little bit of a uncomfortable feeling until we learn a little bit more, I guess.
Okay, let me just finish these slides. There's only a couple of more, and then we can have further discussion. Let's go back to the previous slide for a moment, if we could. Okay, there we go. Final proposal. This is just, I've already talked about this, so I'll go on to the next one. Thank you. Okay, here we go. City agreements approved, purchase and sale agreement, and then the development agreement. They basically work together, but we just decided for functional purposes to divide them into two agreements. The next steps will be closing on the property, city permits and approvals, and then construction start, which is projected to be first quarter of 2021 once the permitting and other entitlement work is complete. And then next slide, please. This is kind of a contextual site plan, so you can see how the massing of the building on the site looks. And it, obviously covers most of the footprint, but that's the design we have today. We don't have any more architectural work at the moment. And that is the substance of my comments. I'm happy to answer any more questions or address anything that somebody might want that we haven't already addressed.
Are there any questions, or is there any further discussion about this discussion item? There's not an action item in front of the commission, but.
This is Jerry Nolte. I had a question, if that's okay.
Yes, sir.
Two things I was wanting to see, and it may well be in the packet and I just didn't see it. What would be the square footage of the apartments, the range we would be in, and what would be the range of the, and obviously at this point it is a bit guesswork because we're far in advance, but what would be the ballpark as far as the monthly rent that would be charged for these apartments?
I don't think we have that, but that is certainly something we can get. I can tell you this, that they're described as first class market rate apartments. So there's no tax credit, tax credits involved on that side of it. And the size range, I think they are still working out what mix of units, typically, studios, 1 and maybe some 2 bedrooms. But we can get all that information and distribute it, but I don't have that. Eric, do you have anything more on that?
No, but I'll ask, put Community Development Director Sarah Copeland on the spot. Sarah, do you have any additional information at this point? It's very early.
No, we don't. The architect has mentioned that they're planning a mix of 1 and 2 bedrooms, but we haven't received anything about an average square footage or a rent level.
Yeah, thank you. I realize that was that we're pretty early on in the process. Something that always, and this does not seem to me on the face of it to fall into that category, but I do always have a concern about the possibility of something that could be a Section 8 housing. This does not strike me at all in that realm, not at all. But I figured I had to ask the question. I mean, they sound like they're quality units, and that they will, as you say, market rate and first class units. So I think it sounds like a great addition, but I just needed to ask the question just to sort of cross that T and dot that I.
Our expectation would be that they would be as good as or better than the current City View apartments that will be their neighbors.
That sounds great. That pretty well answers the question, although I think it would be helpful to get the other information, but that alleviates the question that was in my mind. So thank you very much. I appreciate the responses.
Any other questions or discussions on this item?
No.
All right. Chairman Farr, you want to move on to the next item?
Moving on to RFP for city-owned commercial property.
Thank you, sir. Well, we talked about this, really short time ago. I don't know if I have a whole lot of additional information, except to say that now that the commission has approved the revised CCRs, which is really kind of what we've been, waiting to do before we would issue the RFP, we do feel in a position to do that. And we hope, so we'll expect to be doing that here very shortly in the coming weeks. We'll see what we come up with. As I said, we're opening this up to other uses, just not commercial and retail. And any comers that have any particular uses for this, we'd like to consider. So we'll be expecting to be doing that in the coming weeks. Any questions or comments about that?
Jerry Nolte, let's start a restaurant.
Get somebody to buy the restaurant that's vacated. That would be the first step.
Only if it has a bar in it.
Yeah.
Given.
Yeah. Well, looks like there's no more questions there. Moving on then. The TIF Architectural Design Guidelines Review Procedures. Eric.
Thank you, sir. At this point, I'd like to call on the Community Development Director, Sarah Copeland.
Good evening, commissioners. Kim's going to start up the presentation that I have for you all tonight. It has been several years since we last did design review with the TIF Commission. That was for phase 4 of the garden apartments. And we have several new members to the commission now. So we wanted to give you all an overview of how the design review process works before we get to the point of having you conduct design review for the new development at 23rd and Swift. So Kim, next slide. I really wanted to review four main topics with you, just why we do design review, the process for that, the guidelines themselves, and then talk about how this fits in with the context of other reviews that will happen for the project. Next slide. The purpose of the design review is set out in the TIF plan itself. And it also specifies the project is subject to the requirements of the zoning ordinance, all of our other codes and ordinances, and the design review guidelines are an additional set of minimum standards for reviewing improvements. So there are a host of requirements that the architect is going to need to comply with as they put together their plans. And this is just one set of those. Next slide. The process starts with the developer. They're responding to the city's RFP and preparing the overall plans that then get submitted to the city staff. And our role in this process is really to inform both the developer and you, the TIF Commission, about what requirements exist out there. So we're helping the developer at this time understand what our requirements are, both the design guidelines and zoning ordinance, building codes, and at a future point, we will also be working with you so that you understand what's contained in the design guidelines and how the architect has responded to those. City staff will review all of the submitted plans and designs, and then we also make recommendations. So we will make a recommendation to you in our staff report about whether to approve the design. We may recommend that you consider conditions. We'll put all that into the staff report. So you will review the staff report, you'll get the submitted designs to review, and ultimately you will approve the design at the end of the day. That may be with conditions, that may be as submitted. Now you will approve the design for any new buildings that are within the Northgate Village TIF area. And also if there are any building additions. So if Commissioner Swearingen, if you acquired the Ruby Tuesday to start your restaurant, but you wanted to add on to that building, a building addition would also be subject to design review. I will point out that the interior of buildings is not subject to review by the commission. So if you wanted to acquire Ruby Tuesday and get that building, as long as you are complying with the building code and not adding anything onto it, that would not be subject to TIF Commission design review. Next slide. So in the design guidelines themselves that were updated at the end of 2019, there are really two main sections that the architect is going to be responding to in putting together the design that will be coming to you. One of those is section 3 about residential design, covers these general topics, materials, color, windows, entries, facades, porches and patios, and then there's a miscellaneous section. Next slide, if you could go to that. Section 4 is about commercial design, so it will not be something that we review as part of this review. Section 5 is community design, or the site elements, so sidewalks and circulation, lighting, gateways, public spaces, some of the site layout elements. So when we receive the plans from the architect, staff will go through each of these sections to see how they stack up to the adopted guidelines. Next slide. What you'll receive in your packet is a copy of the renderings and the site layout. the staff report, and then a draft resolution. And I thought it would be helpful for you just to walk through a little bit of how this worked with Gardens Phase 4 to see what you'll be getting in your packet. So the next slide shows two sides of the renderings for Gardens 4. I know this is hard to read because it's formatted for a large scale plotter, but this shows two sides of the facade. It lists materials, it has some call outs for some of the site or the facade elements. The next slide shows the other two sides of the facade. If you go to the next slide, you would have also received in your packet at that time a copy of the site plan for this area. Next slide. So the staff report reviews the submitted design through the lens of the design guidelines. It'll explain design elements, it notes any deviations or concerns that staff might have, and then provides our staff recommendation. So looking at those elements on the next slide, the materials that were shown for this design, they're highlighted in the yellow box, were either listed as acceptable materials in the design guidelines or had been previously approved by the TIF Commission. Fiber cement paneling or fiber cement siding was not listed in the design guidelines, but had been previously approved by the TIF Commission. The design guidelines also request that the heavier materials, such as the brick here, are on the bottom with a lighter material above them. That was done here in this design. Next slide. The colors were compatible with the existing development. They used the same color brick and siding as previous phases of the gardens. Next slide. The design guidelines are concerned about the entries. We want entries facing public streets. So there's an entry on this building off of 31st Avenue. There's also an entry on the interior parking lot. Next slide. Balconies and terraces. So guideline 3G specifically deals with sizes and access to balconies and terraces. That's the first floor patios. They're similar to the existing development. They comply with that guideline. And the next slide shows you that site layout again. So the community standards require appropriate green space, which was provided here in the corner of the L of this building. In the next slide, we also reviewed sidewalks and street trees. They comply with the design guidelines, and they've provided gateways both to Northgate Village in general at the corner with Swift, but also a gateway into the phase 4 site itself. And the next slide is a copy of the resolution. So the resolution that will be presented to you approves the design guidelines. Here we had one condition of approval or one exception. This on page 2 approves the use of the alternative building material, that fiber cement siding, specifically as part of the overall design review process. Next slide. So this does fit into the other reviews and approvals that are required to do a project. So here in general, and this is generally the process that we use, although there's a lot of overlap, projects go through the platting or subdivision process. We review infrastructure plans. We review a site plan. We might take action on rezoning if necessary. And then there's a building code review for the construction documents. You might be wondering, how does this fit into that overall process? The next slide, design review really fits in with site plan review and the building code review. We can't issue a permit until that design review has happened. And we will do that before we finish the building code plan reviews, just in case during the design review process, some change needs to be made to the construction documents. Are there any questions that I can answer about how design review works or about the requirements? Anything you might be wondering about?
Does any commissioners have any there we go. Any questions? Commissioner Pierce, and then I'll call Commissioner Swearinger.
Sarah, thank you very much. Since I am new to this commission, as usual, you make it very easy for me to understand. And if I have any additional questions, having been new, I will contact you. And that was really that was a really easy way for me to understand what my responsibilities will be. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Swearingen.
I'm certain that I've been on this committee long enough that I should know this answer, but why didn't that same process happen with the super block? Why weren't we involved in that? Was that just outside of our TIF zone in some way?
No, we haven't done it yet. The architect is still working on their plans and they haven't submitted anything to us yet. So we
I mean, the 23rd in Swift, the one that we talked about earlier.
Yes, that we haven't received that yet.
So you will have that role, sir, and that Sarah was pointing that out with regard to Gardens 4 as an example of what happened last time.
Right. So what Matt Webster was showing you with those renderings is the architect's first blush, what they think they'll be designing for you. Those have not been reviewed. And in fact, what you eventually review might look very different. Those are really conceptual at this point. So, and I would expect them to change between now and what you eventually see. It will be a surprise if it looks exactly like what Matt just showed you.
Yeah, exactly.
Those were done before they'd even started working with staff. So we are expecting to start receiving formal submittals from them probably later in October. And that would start with the subdivision process because this property has not been platted. And then we'll go through subdivision infrastructure plans and then start looking at a more detailed site plan. And you will be involved, but I would not expect that we will get to design review probably until after the first of the year.
And if I may jump in, yeah, I almost felt like jumping in when Matt Webster was giving his presentation because what you saw on that slide is really just a concept. It's just supposed to give an idea of the kind of quality that we can expect, but it'll probably look very different when it actually gets designed, and the TIF Commission will be thoroughly involved in the design review process at that point.
So that will be similar on the Ruby Tuesday block, the commercial Northgate block. Someone else, the city council, I assume, will approve the deal, whether or not, who the developer is and that, and then they'll come back to us for design review only.
Exactly so. Yes, sir.
So tonight, are you actually asking for approval for the financing portion of the TIF to be amended?
No, sir. We really aren't. We were informing you of the deal that the city council has approved.
So my question is, we're not talking about financing. We're not talking about the actual tax increment financing or TIF involved. We're just talking about whether this building looks pretty or not. And we don't have those ideas yet.
Well, no,
That's
eventually,
correct.
yes, you will conduct design review. That's part of the TIF Commission's role in the TIF plan. And this is to inform you about that process for design review so that it's not totally brand new to you the night that we actually get to that action.
And in all honesty, Commissioner Harrell, Commissioner Fritz, usually the non-city members of the TIF Commission have not been terribly interested in the appearances. They've been more, school district members or county members are usually more interested in the financial aspects of it. But those matters have, largely been decided in the TIF plan. So you're welcome to participate in the design review process when that comes before you. But in the past, that has not really been a role that the non-city members have been very involved in.
So I just might ask one question. And again, I'm not, if it happened, great, but if it didn't, I'm unaware of it. But did you have an opportunity to really sit down with either or request the TIF commissioners from the school district look at the plan before it was submitted to the city for approval, city council for approval, or was that bypassed?
So what the part of the development deal that the city council considered in August didn't involve any changes to the TIF plan. It did involve the Chapter 100.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote to Commissioner Fritz, who's the financial officer for the district, immediately after the action, let him know that it had occurred and we'd be happy to talk to him about it. but we did not ask the school district for consultation prior to bringing it to the city council for approval.
So when you're saying the TIF plan, is this an old TIF plan that this project is being added into? Is that what we're missing here?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
So it doesn't fall under the new TIF guidelines that you guys put together a year ago with regard to no 100% TIF items. You guys have, last time we talked with Matt about the guidelines for approval of new TIFs. This is also one that is grandfathered in. Is that the case?
Yes, sir. This development goes back to around 2020 or even a little bit before, and it's subject to those same guidelines.
If I might jump in, this TIF began its progress in 1999 and it began activation in 2000. So this TIF is over 20 years old.
Okay. Hey, I just have one follow-up comment about that. Did you say again that you did write the letter to Mr. Matt Fritz? You said after the city council had acted on it?
Yes, sir. Immediately afterwards.
Rather than before?
That's correct.
Okay. If I could request at all that the school district receive that type of notification prior to approval, I think it would go over better.
I appreciate the comment. Are there any other discussion or questions about the design review process?
Well, hearing none. On item number 5, is there any public comments out there, Sarah? Or
so at this point, I'd ask the IT manager and or the assistant city administrator who are sitting in the control room for this meeting, if there are any members of the public who are indicating they'd like to make a comment.
So Eric, this is Kim Nakahodo, and as of right now, there are no attendees showing on the Zoom call. So I have no one to call on for public comment at this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to item number 6. Any more staff comments, Eric?
I do not have any Community Development Director Copeland or Assistant City Administrator Nakahodo, Matt Webster, Steve Sparks, any other comments? If not.
Doesn't sound like anybody wants to talk. Do I have any comments from my fellow commissioners?
I do have one. Jerry Nolte here.
Go ahead, Jerry.
And it's not so much on the content, but on more the way the commission meeting is being run. And I want to compliment staff on the ability that they've forwarded to the public for comments. That's something that we've struggled with at the county, and I've had some considerable heartburn over. I just want to say that staff has done, I think, a remarkably good job on allowing the general public to have 3 options to participate in this meeting. And I think that speaks very well both of the staff and of the leadership of the city to include the public in these matters of great importance to them. So that's my comment.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Rita.
Yeah, Pierce.
I would just like to thank you all for allowing me to be part of this committee and this commission. And I've met some of you, but not all of you. And I hope that even with COVID, that eventually you will each reach out to me, because I am new to this and I would really appreciate meeting with you one-on-one, or at least via email or whatever. And really surprised to now be the vice chairman. Excited to do this, and so nice to meet all of you.
Anyone else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So be it.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Nobody opposes, I'm assuming. So let's go and watch the Chiefs game, everybody.
Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.